There's a huge body of data that shows that writing is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal to generate positive change in our lives. I mean, the biggest thing that writing does for us that very few other tools can do is it helps us access another part of our brain that we don't use on a daily basis, or we're less likely to use on a daily basis. It's actually the same part of our brain that we're trying to get to when we enter into a therapeutic process, which is part of how it helps us emotionally. Writing gives us a space on the page to talk about things in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to talk about them. The moment that I really realized how powerful this was, I had been working with writers for 6 years when I really, when this became personal for me. I'd been helping authors outline their books and helping them get published. And over time, I was watching how authors would have this powerful experience with the writing process that didn't have anything to do with their publishing career. They would have a personal experience with telling their story. And I was really fascinated by this, and I started to read some of the data that shows, how powerful of a tool that writing can be. But it wasn't until I went through a divorce, I left an abusive relationship in my life. It was a really challenging time in my life where my professional life and my personal life collided together. At first I thought, this isn't a book that I would ever share with anyone. I'm not going to publish this book. But it was so deeply cathartic and healing for me to be able to read the story and see myself on the page and see myself really differently than I had seen myself when I was living inside of the story. It helped me feel like I owned my story again. I got to decide how I was going to tell this story to myself. I got to decide how I was going to tell this story to the world around me. And it made me feel like, although the details of what I had been through, which were horrific and tragic, had not changed, the way that I felt about those details had changed very significantly. I no longer felt like a victim to my circumstances. I felt like I had overcome impossible odds. I felt really hopeful about my future. I like to give people a sense of the impact that writing can have on your actual biology. So, and also just, your experience of yourself as you move through the world. I think if we really believe what the data shows, that writing can improve our immune systems, in my mind, there's very little that writing couldn't touch for us. There's very little improvements that we want to bring into our life that writing couldn't have an impact on. Typically, when you think, I want to change this daily habit or behavior that I have, you're going to approach that from, for lack of a better way of saying it, from your prefrontal cortex, from the part of your brain that's very logical and analytical. You're going to come up with a strategy for approaching this. You're going to create a path for yourself. You're going to tell yourself, I need to get to the gym for 30 minutes a day for 4 days a week. And you're going to try to carve out time on your calendar and whatever else you're going to do. The problem is that most of your daily behavior is driven from another part of your brain, not your prefrontal cortex, not the logical analytical part of your brain. It's driven from a subconscious part of your brain I talk about in the book called the limbic system. Your limbic system is driving so much of your daily behavior because these subconscious ideas that we have about the world are driving so many of these daily decisions subconsciously outside of our consciousness. The beauty of the writing process is it brings you back to that subconscious part of your brain, so you can not only access those thoughts that are driving your behavior, it will help you better understand why you're reacting or responding in the way that you are to that emotional environment. Well, the data shows that the type of writing that produces this change in our lives is called expressive writing. The beauty of this, and this is why I will shout about this from the rooftops until my last dying breath, is you don't need any kind of training to do this. You don't need any sort of special ability to write well. You don't need to publish a book. You don't really even need writing prompts to do this. Expressive writing, the definition of expressive writing is expressing your deepest thoughts and feelings about a topic on the page. And again, taking us all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, I talked about how sometimes we feel like we don't have any place in our life where we can really truthfully express ourselves. And a journal or a diary or whatever you want to call it, a notebook, a cocktail napkin where you're writing things down, can act as this place where you get to truly express your deepest thoughts and feelings about a topic. You get to say something that you don't feel like there's any other safe place where you could say this thing. So that's the beauty of the writing process, is that it's incredibly accessible to absolutely anybody who wants to use it. But I actually think the biggest thing that gets in people's way is this idea that we have about how writing has to be. A lot of that comes to us through our experience in the public education system. We feel like writing has to have perfect grammar. It's got to be, our spelling has to be great. It has to show up in a certain kind of format. We need like a 5-paragraph essay, or we need a persuasive argument, or whatever. And the reality with expressive writing is you can break all of those rules and you can still get all the benefit from expressive writing. It can literally be a bunch of disjointed words that are scribbled in various directions across the page. You can write diagonally, you can write backwards, you can write with your non-dominant hand, you could color with crayons, you could write with colored pencils. You do not have to follow any of the traditional rules that you have learned and believed about the writing process in order for this to work. It's called the infinity prompt, and I called it that because if you use this prompt, it will turn your life into material that you can use to always have something to write about. It teaches you how to do what I call metabolize your life, which is take in the experiences of your life, to break it down into pieces, to decide what's useful for you, hold on to the good stuff, and then whatever is not useful to you, you can let go and move on. Essentially, with the infinity prompt, you start with an event from your life that feels particularly charged. And you mentioned, in the last year, we've all been through collectively a lot of what I would call trauma. It's looked differently for each person, but we've been through a collective trauma together. So there's likely something in the last 12 months of your life that feels really charged. So you choose an event from your life that feels charged, that has some electricity to it. Then you start by writing the facts of the situation. So think about what I mentioned before when I was going through the divorce, leaving that abusive relationship. I was bullet point listing, here's what happened to me, here's the day that it happened, here's the time that it happened. What I was intuitively doing was listing the facts of the situation. So the facts of the situation, imagine that you're a journalist or you're a reporter, and your job is to report about what's happening, but to report on it from a fairly unemotional perspective, to kind of take your objective or subjective viewpoint out of it and just list what took place. So to the best of your ability, you start by listing the facts. Then the second step in the prompt is to list the ideas or beliefs that you have about the facts that you listed. A great way to get into this part of the prompt is just to start by writing, the story I'm telling myself is. So if the fact of the matter is some guy cut me off in traffic, maybe the story that I'm telling myself is he was having a bad day. Or the story that I'm telling myself is, nobody respects me, or whatever it is. And then the third step in the prompt is to write about how that made you feel. Right, as you write this third part of the prompt, I want you to think about what I talked about earlier with the cognitive behavioral model, where you're defining the emotional environment that existed because of the facts of the situation. This can get complicated for people. Sometimes people are like, I'm not sure if this is a thought or a feeling. If you bump up against that, you're doing the prompt correctly, because it can be really difficult to divide these three out, and it's also very powerful. What you begin to see is how the thoughts or beliefs that we have about our life create an emotional environment that lead to our response or reaction that create a result for us.